Right, well we've got a couple of, it looks a bit vacant, but we've got a few apologies, so I'll talk about those soon, but we'll start off with the prayer. Me ino e tātou I te atua, tēnei o tēnei mātua, o mema kui, kua poutou, te hapore a Whanganui, arohina I a mātou, ki te whakatau nā whakatonga pai, mō te rohi, mō nā tangata katoa, kia piki, ai te ora o te hapori, me nā iwi katoa o Whanganui, haumai, hui e, taiki e. Amen. Right. So the welcome this morning to a pretty significant meeting. So before we get into it, we have some apologies. So can I, that the Council accepts the apology of Councillors Philippa Baker-Hogan, Councillor Jenny Duncan, Councillor Charlie Anderson and the Community Board Chair David Wells, and grants leave of absence for this meeting. All those in favour? Mover. Councillor Ross and the seconder, Councillor Helen. All those in... Yeah, trying to. Bear with. I'm not logged in.
Just in the minutes, it gets recorded as an apology, just in the leave of absence part. It's working now?
Yeah, it's working now. Yeah. Okay. So, and Councillor Helen, right, you got that? Yep. Yes. So all those in favour? Aye. Against? Motion carried. And leave of absence, there aren't any, but there will be for next time.
Just got Jenny on a leave of absence, but
yep.
It's been accepted.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. All right. Do we have any declarations of interest? Okay. None there. All right. I do have a little message for today as well. And it goes back to, I draw back to when I was sworn in as Mayor at Putiki Marae last October. And I did say at the time that the headwinds of, that the economic headwinds were starting to blow for the country. And actually things felt pretty good at that time, but call it male intuition, I don't know what it is, but I could feel that things were starting to become challenging just from conversations with people, but also reading various reports. And so I said that some would bypass Whanganui, but some would come at us like a cold southerly. And we're seeing this happen this year, and looking into the economic forecast ahead, we can see we'll be leaning into the wind for a couple of more years to come. Well, hopefully into next year things will start to settle down a little bit, but certainly it's going to be tough for a little while yet. While business activity in Whanganui is still strong relative to the rest of the country, we're acutely aware that times are tough for many households. Talking to people, there is a sense of pain with many. I've been around the community a lot lately, and it's certainly people are feeling it more difficult than they did 6 months ago. Wanganui's average rates rise this year is mid-range in a national context, but this is going as hard as possible to reduce costs and find efficiencies, and we've worked hard to do that. In my view, the situation is untenable and it's unsatisfactory, especially given our significant rate rise is already being forecast a significant rate rise is being forecast for next year just to sustain our current work program. And this will be the same situation for councils right across the country. Our rate system is fundamentally flawed, and the funding model for local government needs to change, and we've recognised that, and there's been that rhetoric around our council table. My priority now is to push for central government to adopt recommendations from the recent Future for Local Government report that, for example, would see GST collected on rates go to councils instead of central government. Another push will be for central government to pay rates on Crown property. Both these would boost the income needed to run the district and significantly alleviate the burden on our ratepayers. The GST intake would be around $10 million just on its own. And either way, the flow of money from our community to the beehive outweighs the flow to us, and so does the level of influence we have with legislation and reform, including unfunded mandates, along with centralisation causing a dilution of local government influence on decision making. I said we would fight back against these, and we are doing the best we can, and I think we've gone as far as we can, as others have across the country. To progress the Future for Local Government report, which I think met favourably after the initial draft, I've nominated our Chief Executive David Langford and myself to be part of an LGNZ panel to review the 17 recommendations in this report. We will learn of our selection at the LGNZ conference later on this month. When we were presented with the initial figure of 11.3 for the average rates rise back in January, we asked staff to go through the books line by line to find savings. This was not an easy exercise, and I want to thank council officers for this work. And in fact, I do want to say thank you to all our council officers as we undergo a lot of reform and legislative and regulatory change right across the board. David and his team have done, I think, an outstanding job under significant pressure. And I think for ourselves, I'm new to this role, and a number of us are, but my understanding is that we have never been under this much pressure at local government level and this much change. So thank you to council officers. Councils, like households, have been facing unprecedented cost rises from interest, inflation and construction industry cost hikes, and we've had to make hard decisions to cut and defer non-essential projects. Some of our projects have experienced cost increases due to the post-COVID economic environment, and we're so far along the only viable option is to complete them. By June, we had average rates rise down to 8.3%, and in the final calculation, we will soon learn that the average rate rise will reduce slightly further, thanks to additional new properties being added to Whanganui this year. With significant growth in the number of new properties, there are more properties to pitch on rates, so the amount for existing properties is reduced. Now, the average rates rise for households works out to about $5 a week on average. All households are different in saying that, so when ratepayers look at the 23-24 rates assessment in about the first week of August, there will be a variation up or down significantly from the average. This is driven by our recent district-wide revaluation by QV, identifying dramatic increases in the value of land, especially in lower-priced areas like Aramoho, Gonville and Castlecliff, and especially those with a decent chunk of land. Even so, if you're in a lower-priced property, your rates will be less than in those in higher-priced properties. So my message to those that are listening here is, and are feeling under pressure now, or think you might be, you'll be eligible for the rates rebates, which is now increased to up to $750, and you can find out if you're eligible on the council website. So welcome to everyone online and also in the council chambers for today's rates striking session, and first for many of us, and I'm looking forward to progressing this, and looks like Simon's coming to the table. So welcome, Simon. You're going to give us a summary of the report, and I've probably stolen some of your thunder, but yeah, welcome.
No problem. Morning all. So obviously this morning we're here to resolve the rates for the 23-24 year. This is a very procedural process, putting in place the decisions made in the annual plan, and which was adopted on the 27th of June. Sorry, where am I pointing the clicker? There we go. Oh, it's a bit small, sorry about that. So, annual plan was adopted on the 27th of June this year, so the rates resolution puts in place the rates outlined and the decisions made in the annual plan. Rates are set based on valuations at the 30th of June every year, and in the lead up to the 30th of June, QV captures all of the building activity subdivisions. This year, revaluation challenges, and all of that sort of information, and we get the most up-to-date information on the 30th of June that we possibly can. We then do our calculations to set the rates. Rates notices from here will be printed and distributed, and hopefully in people's letterboxes on around about the 1st of August. So, a bit of a summary of what's happening around the sector since last year. So we've had a revaluation this year. Last year our total district-wide valuation was just shy of $10 billion. It's now just shy of $15.5 billion. So that's a $5.5 billion increase in capital value across the whole district. 55% increase. Number of SUIPs that's separately used or in habitable parts of a rating unit. We have an increase in the number of SUIPs by 271 units, which is a 1.2% increase. Now that's quite an important number, because that's really what drives your rates growth. So just a wee bit of a definition, Andrew alluded to it earlier, that growth we've defined as any new properties that have been created, less properties that are no longer rated. So that's a subdivision where you've got one property now created into 30 different properties. Change in the number of SUIPs, so we may have had a separate granny flat added to the back of a section, or a shop subdivided, etc. Changes between the residential, farming and commercial categories, which happens for various reasons, and changing capital value for since last year. A little bit tricky to pick that one in a revaluation year, but I have worked out where there was no improvements on the land this year, and there's significant improvements, and somebody might have built a house. So we've picked those ones up as growth as well. So looking at it by sector, we have an additional 225 residential SUIPs, accounting for $729,000 worth of additional rates from those properties. In total, our growth is 1,068,000, which is a fairly significant growth. That figure's inclusive of GST. In our annual plan, we forecast a growth figure of 600,000, which is excluding GST. This is $300,000 greater than that. So when we've talked about the average rates increase of 8.3%, that's assumed a $600,000 growth. Assuming the actual growth that we've got, our rates increase is 7.9% to existing properties. So you'll see the greatest area of growth is that residential sector, but also the commercial sector has some fairly significant growth, and most of those properties, from my quick analysis of that, seem to be in about the Mill Road area. Breaking it down by suburb, looking through this is just the residential properties. It seems to be happening fairly well across the board. So there's a few areas around where obviously there's a bit more growth happening than others, but looking at those numbers, there seems to be growth happening throughout the whole district. So just going back to comparing back to the annual plan, in the annual plan we said that the residential rates would be 8.3%. With the adjusted values, that's 8.1%. Lifestyle's gone from 12.8 to 12.1. Farming has actually gone up a little bit from 7.6 to 7.7. Commercial has dropped from 6.0 to 5.9. So overall, 8.3 has come down to 7.9%. And again, looking at the average rates by sector, the average residential rate this year, and this is an average, and very stress that it's very hard to find the average property, because there are a number of different factors that contribute to a property's rates. So trying to find the average property is a little bit tricky, but the average residential rate is just shy of $3,400. The other sectors tend to pay a bit more. Lifestyle's a little bit less because they don't tend to have water or wastewater services or stormwater. Just looking across the district again, breaking down the average residential rates, and this is where you see a little bit of the impact of the revaluation this year. So if we work through looking down the average land value increase, which is the sort of one of the middle columns there, you'll see those big spikes, 148% for Aramaho. That results in an average rates increase for Aramaho of greater than the 8.1%. So as you see, the valuation has meant that the rates increases don't fall evenly. We've had a different methodology from, and we've heard from QV earlier in the year about how they value sections. One of the things that I find quite interesting with this information is that if you look down the average rates 23-24 column, there's actually not a huge difference between a lot of those average rates by suburb. Now that's a big change this year from what we've had in previous years. The average in Aramaho was much lower than in St John's and Springvale, and now, as you see with these figures here, they're a lot closer. That's all I've actually prepared to speak on. I've just addressed a question that came through from a councillor overnight or the last couple of days with regard to rates penalties. The question was our rates penalties are set at 5% per instalment plus an extra 5% for overdue rates in January and July. That previously was 10%, and under the Local Government Rating Act we're allowed to set that up to 10%. We reduced that in 2020 post-COVID to 5%. So, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Simon, and great summary. So really appreciate that. So do we have any questions? Council officers, Councillor. Not sure what's happening here. Could you help out here, please? So, seems to be locked. All right, Councillor Kate.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. It's interesting information. I think I saw that in terms of number of new SUIPs by breakdown, there was quite a few in Whanganui Rural, and then I saw when you broke them down by different category, like lifestyle was not that much. So can you just explain what Whanganui Rural means?
Yeah, so the lifestyle definition, I'll start with that. So a farm in our definition starts at a property greater than 3 hectares. So the lifestyle, but a genuine farm is really something that's greater than 10 hectares. So the properties that we classify as lifestyle properties for this purpose are between 3 and 10 hectares. So properties lower than 3 hectares but greater than half a hectare are still classed as residential properties. So those are the ones that are in Whanganui Rural will be properties lower than 3 hectares but are on the outskirts of town. So potentially, Moston Road or they're dotted around the whole of the district.
But essentially between 0.5 and 3 hectares is what you're saying. It's
yes.
Described as a Whanganui Rural.
Yeah, the rural relates to the location. So we've used the rating qualifier, the rating assessment number, which determines the location of the land to determine the suburb that it falls into, and so that determines the location of the land. But if it's greater than 3 hectares, then it will fall into the lifestyle category as opposed to the residential.
Thank you. In terms of our ongoing analysis and understanding of growth, I know there's a piece of work around the spatial plan. I think I've got and I know this is not your area, but have we got a growing understanding of where our increases are coming from?
I guess from a rating perspective, often the growth hits when a property is subdivided more so than when it's built on. So there are a few subdivisions that have happened. We had one subdivision come through in the very last week of June that created another 30 odd properties. So I'm sure the planners would probably have some earlier indication of where those properties may fall. I think from a rating perspective, it needs to have the certain sign off of probably the section 224s and things like that before the property's created. So there's a formal process for actually creating them as to when we can actually rate them.
Right. Thank you very much. Yeah, I would be interested in understanding what our better understanding of where the growth is occurring and how that's affecting our planning.
Okay. We take that as an action, is that right? To take away? I think everyone would be interested in it. Yeah.
I would like more visibility of it as we're pulling that.
Yeah.
Through you, Your Worship, just a quick comment from me. So, yes, absolutely, through the work for the preparation of the long-term plan, quite a bit of that detail will start getting shared with elected members, because you'll also have to start factoring in some additional infrastructure growth-related projects to make sure we can service a growing population as well. So, through those processes, you'll definitely get visibility over the next 12 months.
Great, thank you. Councillor Rob?
Thank you. Simon, you made a comment about the valuations and the difference in rating increases by suburb. I just wonder whether you could make a comment about the decreases in value, because I think it's been said that there's 800 properties approximately that have got at least a 30% increase. There are probably the same number of properties in Wanganui that got a decrease in dollar value. So can you just explain that? Because I think when the rate demand comes out, the public might be a bit confused by this.
Just to be clear, the properties are very unlikely to have decreased in value. They just may not have increased in value by as much as percentage-wise as another property. So
their rate's gone down.
Yeah, so the rates are a bit of a pro rata. So the Rating Act says that we can only charge 30% of our rates on a fixed fee per property. So we can't just take our total rates bill and divide it by our 21,000 properties and say, there you go, there's your share. The Rating Act says that you can only do that for 30% of your rates, which means that the rest of it has to be done on some valuation factors or some other factors outlined in the Rating Act. The factor that largely has driven our rates increase is the general rate, which is based on land value for Wanganui. So in the slide that I showed for Aramaho, for example, the average land value went up by 148%. The actual, what that looks like in dollar terms, and I'll just pick a rough example of what it meant. A property with a valuation 6 years ago, that property in Aramo might be a quarter acre section, quite a large section, would have had a land value of about $30,000. The last revaluation 3 years ago increased across the district the land value by about $60,000, so that puts that property's land value to about $90,000. The property now, across the board, roughly speaking, $200,000 is roughly the value of a section anywhere in Wanganui. So that property's land value has gone up percentage-wise from $90,000 to $200,000, so there's a fairly large percentage increase. A similar property in St John's Hill, for example, may have gone from about $160,000 to $250,000. The percentage increase is not as great on their land value, and so therefore they're still paying more rates because their land value is greater than the $200,000 land value in Aramaho. But proportionately there may be a decrease in their rates because it's they're wearing less of the overall percentage. Does that make sense? Sorry, I've confused myself almost. Yeah, it's a pro rata.
Okay, and another question: the wastewater targeted rate has gone up substantially. Can you just comment on that, please?
Yeah, the major driving factors in wastewater are interest. So our interest rates have gone up fairly significantly this year as they have for homeowners as well. We've also increased a little bit of our debt servicing, our loan repayments within the wastewater area as well, as we work through the transition through to the new entities. We've been having discussions with the National Transition Unit, and one of the things they've taken quite an interest in is making sure that when the activities are handed over to them, that we haven't actually underrated them significantly, so that they can't leverage off that going forward, because they're going to be responsible. So we've had to, in discussion with the transition unit, increase the amount of rates in the wastewater area.
Okay, so I believe it's 29%.
That's the amount that on the pan tax, yeah.
So can you just comment then, you might need some time to work out the figures maybe, but what is the Three Waters contribution in the current rate demand? You've got wastewater, stormwater, and potable water, and we've got targeted rates for that. So what's the average per household?
Per household, probably I can't sort of figure it out off the top of my head, but generally speaking, the Three Waters makes up about a third of our total rates revenue. Yeah. So that may vary from property to property, but just as a broad rule of thumb, it's roughly a third.
Yeah, so it's probably an average of 1,200 odd.
Yeah, that's probably not too far off. I'll just give me a minute. I'll see if I can find a figure.
I think it's quite interesting for the public, because we're going into a situation where they're going to get a bill from another party, and it's good to understand what we're paying now, and and it's quite clear on the rate demand.
So just recently, we've done a table from the rates newsletter, which outlines the rates on an average property. So I'm just finding that property and what they pay. So yeah, this average property of $3,398 residential property pays $1,170 worth of Three Waters rates.
Oh yeah. That hasn't gone up very much at all, has it, from last year?
Not necessarily.
No.
Yeah. Look, it's water and wastewater are fixed charges, so those are fairly consistent across the board. Stormwater is based on capital value, so that varies quite significantly depending on your capital value of your property.
Okay. And the other one I'd like you to comment on is...
Sorry, this comment or questions?
It's a question I'd like him to comment on. Is that there's always been a lot of concern in the Central Business District about the levy. Can you comment on what the increase is on the levy, please? It's a targeted rate there.
Yeah, so there is a targeted rate. We had an increase in the cleaning costs of the main street this year. So there has been an increase in the Main Street levy, and I think the figure was
14%.
14%. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Councillor Peter.
I would like to congratulate my colleague because he stole most of my thunder. The question then is, on the targeted rates, generally do they track up with inflation? And is that inflation true to the real inflation, e.g. the roading costs have gone up, say, 20% as compared to normal inflation of 7%?
Yeah, so I think we'll find going forward we're in a very high inflationary environment, and those activities paying the high rates are probably the worst placed. So we know in the last few years that inflation on Three Waters infrastructure spending has skyrocketed. We know that roading costs have ballooned up as well. So there will be going forward some significant increases in that area. I think with roading we're in a funding block of 3 years with NZTA. We're in the 3rd year of that. Next year in the long-term plan there'll be a new window, so that might be an interesting.
Yeah, thank you, Simon, and for the report.
All right, no further questions or clarification? Great. So if there are no more questions, I'm going to propose that we move the recommendation on the screen that the Whanganui District Council, I'm going to read it out just so, okay. That the Whanganui District Council sets out the following rates inclusive of GST under the Local Government Rating Act 2002 on rating units in the district for the financial year commencing on 1 July 2023 and ending on 30 June 2024. A, uniform general charge, and B, general rate. C, roads and footpaths rate. D, roading resilience rate. E, targeted rate on exotic forestry properties. F, earthquake strengthening and building replacement rate. G, city water supply rate. H, city water firefighting rate. I, Pakaraka maximum water supply rate. J, Westmere water supply rate. K, city wastewater rate. L, trade waste contributions to the city wastewater treatment plant. M, trade waste fixed operating costs rate. N, Mawhanau wastewater rate. O, stormwater disposal rate. P, central business district services rate. Q, separate works rate. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Peter. All right. Okay, so any comments on this item? Councillor Rob, quick off the mark.
Quick off the mark, yeah, thank you. Yes, well, the major thing about this particular year is that it's a revaluation year, and every revaluation year there's often a distortion of the rates. You know, and this has happened this time to a greater degree than I've ever witnessed before. And there is going to be a lot of confusion out there when this rate demand arrives on 1st of August. Those who haven't taken the opportunity to look at the council website and look at their rates beforehand are probably going to get quite a shock on the day, because there are many in this community that will have rate demands that are higher than 30%. And as I raised before, there are many in this community that are actually getting rate reductions. So it's difficult to sort of understand this across the board. I think that the valuations that came out at September the 22nd are probably not relative to what they are today in terms of actual value, because I think there's a lot of evidence that values have come down. But that doesn't really make any difference at this point in time on how the rates are calculated. If we used a new valuation as at today, it probably wouldn't change at all where the burden falls. So I think that people should understand that, because there will be a lot in the community that will say, oh, my value's come down since then, I should have lower rates than that. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. So I would just encourage the public to have a look at the council website. It's a great tool to be able to look at your rate demand this year, and there's your rate demand there for next year. You don't have to wait till 1st of August. It may vary $1 or $2. There may be some adjustments still to make, probably not. But it's there for people to understand, and it's there, it's available right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Rob. Great comment. I would endorse that. I've been on to see my own properties rates increases, and they are quite significant as well, so the Mayor doesn't get off these things either. But it is a really helpful site, and it breaks everything down, and it is also updated to reflect the new rates increase that has just been announced today. So it's actually live with that, so that data is valid right now. Councillor Kate.
Thank you. Just very briefly, thank you to the team for all your work through this process. Yeah, we get great information, very concise and up to the minute, so thank you for that. I'd also just want to remind anybody who's watching that we have a really great team down in the rates department, and when you get your rates demand, you know, there's an increase there that's scary. Please talk to the rates team, yeah, and deal with it earlier rather than later.
Thank you. Councillor Ross.
Thank you, Chair. We're setting the rates, striking the rates today. The public needs to be aware that there's not a huge lineup of councillors commenting or asking questions. That's not through lack of engagement or interest. This is the culmination of many months of discussions and research and workshops and meetings that council staff and councillors have attended. So I just want to point that out to those who may be listening, that this is the end point, and all our questions and our concerns and our queries have been addressed as best they possibly can. I want to reinforce what Councillor Robb said and Councillor Joblin said. I, as quickly as I could, checked my rates assessment early before the mail out on August the 1st. I think it's very important for your own peace of mind, your own preparations, perhaps your own forward budgeting planning, that you do go on the website, you do look up your rates notice so that you are fully informed before it comes out in the letterbox. I'm better off for it. I am one of the ones at the tail end that is quite significant, and I'm much better off for knowing that in advance, and I'm better prepared for what I have to and I need to do for the next 12 months. And I do want to thank the staff. I am so well educated. I wish I could share all the knowledge that I've gained with the community, that we could just pass it on and they could absorb the understanding that I have received and appreciate. It doesn't take away the pain, but I do get the understanding, and that's the important part. Thank you very much for that.
Councillor Helen, Deputy Mayor Helen.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I just want to reiterate what people may have picked up in the past, but the government does provide a subsidy on rates that people can apply for if they're low income. So it's the government paying that subsidy, not council, but council administers it. So people should feel confident coming forward if you're on a low income, you've got to pay your rates, come in and check out to see if you can apply for that subsidy, because it does help, and it's not affecting anybody else in our district. It's the government who pays for it, so please apply and make inquiries. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so no further comments, so I'm going to put the motions from A to Q on the screen. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. We do have a couple more resolutions to pass, so I'll talk to those separately. So we've, in the paper on page 11, we've gone up to separate works rate, and got a couple of additional items that all rates except those for metered water are payable in 4 equal instalments on the following due dates as outlined. That the water rates due dates be set as follows based on the date the water meter is read as per the table, and that a discount of 2.5% be allowed on all net 23-24 rates paid in full by 30 August 2023, and that the council apply penalties as follows on For rates excluding water, metered water, a charge of 5% will be added to any amount of an instalment remaining unpaid after the due date on the following dates as per the table. B, an additional charge of 5% will be added to all metered water rates that remain unpaid after the due date on the following dates as per the table. And D, an additional charge of 5% will be added to rates assessed in any previous financial year that remain unpaid on 19 July 2024. The penalty will be added on 19 July 2024. An additional charge of 5% will be added on 19 January 2025 if the amount remains unpaid. Can I have a mover, Councillor Ross, seconder, Councillor Charlotte. All right. Any comments on this item? I can't imagine there will be, but never know. All right. Okay. So I'll put the motion on the screen as outlined. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Great. Thank you. All right. Fantastic. So we now move to item 6.2, Wanganui Airport Joint Venture Final Statement of Intent, 23-24. So I think, great. Welcome to the table. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so the Wanganui Joint Venture Statement of Intent has been presented to the Ministry of Transport for their endorsement and received that and is presented today for approval.
Great. Excellent. That was quick to the point. Anything you'd like to, any additional items in the report that you'd like to talk to, or we're just happy for comments, or questions I should say?
Happy for questions.
Okay, great. Right. So far, nothing, looks like you might get away with some questions as well. No questions at this stage. All right, so there are no questions. I will,
I'll put the motion.
okay, great. Okay, perfect. So Councillor, Deputy Mayor Helen and Councillor Josh, seconder. All right, excellent. Any comments on this item? Great, thanks, Councillor Kate.
Look, I'm fine to support this, but I would suggest that when in our report we are told there is only one viable option, I'd suggest to the meeting that that's not the case, that we can always breach the legislation if we've got a good reason to do so. In fact, we already have. So maybe a minor thing, but a bit of a principle, really. I don't like being told there's only one viable option.
All right. Okay. All right. Excellent. Okay. Well, there's there are no further comments on this item. So I will put the motion on the screen that the council, as a joint partner, adopts a statement of intent 23-24 for the Wanganui Airport joint venture, and that the council receives the statement of intent 23-24 for the Wanganui Airport joint venture. All those in favour? Against? Motion is carried. Right. Thank you. Oopsie. And that is the end of the meeting. So I'm just going to close the meeting. E hoa ki runga ki a Ranganui, e hoa ki raro ki a Papatoa Nuku, whakatairanga, te kupu, te korero, te mahi, ki te po o te whare, he tonga, he mahi a muri, ka puta ki ta whai, au ki ta o marama, haumai, hui e taiki e.